It's not this Rugby Union Show, it's that Rugby Union Show, and welcome back. It's been a week and so much to talk about in the past week, and as you can well see, I am in a hotel. I am far from home at the moment. Find myself in the Seychelles, not covering rugby, covering beach soccer. We won't talk about that. We've got more important things, more pressing matters to talk about. We are leading up to the end of the URC season. It is the penultimate round coming up. The British and Irish Lions has been announced, as has their captain, up against an Australian team that has been struggling over the last little bit. I won't be doing it alone, though. And as you like, share, and subscribe, I am joined by Simnigue Labanisa and Sim. Just a quick reminder that you need to share this and that you can send us questions and comments if you do have any for this week's show. Good to see you, my bra. You're wearing a whole coat and I've been sweating since, when did I arrive here? Since Sunday, but it hasn't helped me lose any weight. So much for that.
Yeah, it is what it is. There's a certain age that once you hit it, that weight loss thing doesn't happen unless you gravely ill. So, if you're not losing weight, just be grateful that it's a sign that you're not sick. But yeah, I am a bit envious. Like you said, I must admit today wasn't as cold as I've made it look, but maybe where I'm sitting here at home, it's a bit cooler than, and also it's nighttime. But look, I'm very envious. But yeah, I'm not sure I would have had patience with the football though.
No, and I've seen a lot of dives, and I think the first thing that absolutely struck me, I watched a game between Guatemala and Belarus, which was very weird. That was the first match I watched with a friend and a colleague that you know very well, Liam Del Calm, was also a rugby guy watching football, which is just bizarre, is how these guys, you know how soccer players tend to love a dive and a roll, but because the sand, they only do half a roll so that the sand doesn't get in the hair and on the face, and it makes you realize the acting is very different on beach sand. But anyway, let's not talk about that because it's been quite a week.
Yeah, you don't want to get sand in all the wrong places, if you know what I mean.
That's it. And they play barefoot. I mean, come on, you wouldn't even do that in touch rugby. But yeah, what a week it's been, and I suppose the big one locally, and we'll touch on it a little bit later, is URC. It's business end. South African teams will all want to make it into the quarters. They're looking good at the moment, bar the Lions. But most importantly, in rugby terms, British and Irish Lions squad has been announced, and their captain has been announced, and he made our thumbnail today, looking mightily ready to roar and scary. It's the gang sign above my head that gets me the most. But Maro Itoje, it's probably not too much of a surprise that this is the man that they've selected to lead the team. Is there anyone else? Kalen Dory's terrible injury, or at least timed injury to him, and it requires surgery on the shoulder, so he's not even being selected at all. And I know sometimes Lions coaches will select an injured player in the hopes that towards the back end of the tour, when the test matches start, that they might be ready. Is there anyone else maybe who you thought could have contested Maro for the captaincy?
The captaincy, I suppose the only other person who would have been the coach's son, Owen Farrell.
Right.
He's moved out of playing in England at Saracens, and he now plays for Racing. And Racing, who've had a stinker of a season. I mean, look, they did make it as far as the semi-finals of the Challenge Cup, but they just haven't looked a very good team. And I think sometimes I think he's one of the guys that got injured because he got substituted, I think, in the first half of their semi-final. And so I think as a result, he's probably an injury doubt. And actually, just to go back to what you were saying, this was supposed to be a 40-man squad. And what has happened is they've gone with 38. The thinking there being that they're leaving 2 spots. The way it's been phrased is that for guys who kind of like still show, the requisite form to be included. But actually the other thing is maybe it's to make space for the guys that are injured, if they do heal sort of Alan Wynne Jones style, suddenly, miraculous recovery. So I think that for me would have been, the other guy that would have been in contention for the captaincy. But if you do look at a squad that size and a squad composed from that many different nations, I'd imagine finding captain wouldn't be that difficult. It's just that also it's one of those things that happens with Lions squads. If you remember '97, nobody had Martin Johnson as the guy who was going to captain, because I think at the time he wasn't even the English captain.
England
And
captain,
so
he
what
wasn't.
happened? Yeah. And so what happened was, they just decided on a whim to go with him. And as in the end, he ended up going on 2 tours as a captain, which is unprecedented. And obviously one of the sad things that did happen was that, the last time the Lions did go to Australia, which is where they're going now, he was captain and they
Yeah.
lost. That was 3 or 4 years ago. And they've kind of repeated history by getting an English captain and they're going back to Australia. So if you like your omens, there you go.
Yes. Yeah, I suppose it's a big one for them, but it does lead for opportunities for younger players as well, this squad. And it's interesting to see a 20-year-old Henry Pollock making the squad. And I think it's probably a good sign for Pollock, and quite a lot of faith being put into him by the coach. Sam Pendergast, he misses out. So if you look at those sort of fly half options, Finn Russell, Finn Smith, Marcus Smith, it's quite exciting if they do get it right. Their sort of running game as well. Not too many surprises that it's mostly an island or an island-heavy team. Only 2 Welshmen making the squad, 8 Scots as well. And to break it down by club, 12 Leinster players who everybody in Ireland seems absolutely pissed off by. I mean, every time I Google anything to do with Leinster, it's like they've let the world down at the moment, but it's still an incredible squad, and you would expect a number of them to make the squad. I suppose no real other surprises, really, bar the coach's son missing.
No, not really. I mean, you could go with a guy like, say, Jack Willis, who plays for Toulouse and starts at Toulouse. That's
Mm,
that's that's usually a team that boasts about, in a 23, they'll boast about 22 internationals, and the 23rd guy is usually like a junior French international, which means that's kind of an international too. So he's
yeah,
the one guy that's missing. But I think there, what's happened is there's a degree of observing that you keep it within Ireland and within the home unions,
mm,
and I think maybe that might be the thinking there. And then I mean, you talk about the Leinster Northampton Saints semi final in the Champions Cup. Obviously, that massive upset that everyone in Ireland is so upset at Leinster for.
yeah,
I think, if you then look at Leinster's young flyer, gifted Sam Prendergast, um, he hasn't made it because he didn't have a particularly good game. But if you look on the other end of, the other end of the field, Finn Smith was in that game
yeah,
and he played very well. And then
yeah.
obviously Pollock, you just mentioned, he also played out of his socks. This Pollock guy is obviously quite an interesting entry, because there's probably a whole host of under 20 players who are very grateful that he's made the Lions tour, because if he hadn't made that, he was still eligible to go to the World Rugby's under 20 championships this year, having
Yeah.
been 19 when the year started. So I think his birthday is on the 14th of January or something. So a guy like that, they're probably grateful that he doesn't have to play against them. A lot of South Africans see similarities in him and old Bob Skinstad, in that you can play in all 3 of the loose forward positions. And obviously he's quick and he gives the impression that he could actually play amongst the backs as well. And he's quite a cocky sort as well, he's got the celebration way, he checks his pulse, after he scored. Apparently on his before his test debut against Italy, he actually said he told his teammates that he would score, and of course he scored twice. So
Wow.
this it's a guy that's not very short in confidence, and happily for him, he's not short in ability either.
Yeah, Andre, thanks for that message. Noting my cap, which says Takamaka, which is a rum distillery down the road. I didn't participate. I never do. I mean, really, it's not. It's
Yeah,
overrated.
famous last
But
words.
Yeah, but it is owned by two South African boys from Quebec, which is very interesting. Sort of walk in and sort of hear these South Africanisms around you, and you're sort of 3,000 kilometers away from home. But thanks for that one, Andre. Very interested in Farrell as coach as well. We haven't had the chance to talk about it because there were some who were surprised by the appointment. I don't know if I was too surprised by the appointment. Um, I don't know who else they would have gone with. Warren Gatland obviously was the man before in the hot seat, and he's had a really bad run of it with Wales. He was never going to survive. Um, is there any other direction that you think that they possibly could have looked when it comes to head coach? I'm not too surprised because when he has been a head coach, I think he's really gotten the guys to express themselves so much on the field. He does tend to want to play a very expansive type game. And I suppose he'll feel that he doesn't only need to overpower Australia, but he'll want to outflank them, outscore them, outrun them. And they certainly could.
Look, I think if anyone was surprised that he was made coach, it could only be because of his league background, which, hasn't been a factor in such a long time. You know, Andy Farrell has since played for England proper, which is the rugby union side. He has
Yeah.
since coached in the English coaching team. And then over and above that, he coached that Ireland team. I know we make the joke that they never make they make it past the quarterfinals. But I think as South Africans, more than anybody else, we're quite aware of how good the Irish are simply because they beat us in the group stages game that we played against them, obviously making them the only team to beat us at the World Cup. And then the second part is, when they came down here, once we won at Loftus, most people would have thought they'd go away. This is last year's series, 2-match series, but they
Yeah.
came back at us in Durban and they beat us, and that was quite a deserved victory. I know it was nip tuck, and people were blaming Sasha. Why didn't he do this with with the ball that he was supposed to catch? Actually, it was a deserved victory. And the one thing I've always liked about Andy Farrell in the short space of time that he's coached against South Africa in particular, or coached against Rassie, we like to talk about Rassie being in your head. I think he's literally one of the few coaches in whose head Rassie doesn't pay any rent,
Yeah.
or doesn't live rent free. Let me put it that way.
Mm.
And
Well,
so I think actually, yeah, I couldn't have seen anybody else. You could have gone with Gregor Townsend at Scotland, but that's going on potential, and worse potential that hasn't quite shown itself in
exactly.
winning the Six Nations. Obviously Warren Gatland had a nightmare when he came back. They hadn't won a game since the World Cup or something silly like that
Yeah.
under him. That's a problem. And then I'm trying to think who else. England, yes, they kind of finished the Six Nations strongly, but they look, and they obviously made the semifinals under Steve Borthwick. But I don't know. They so far from the finished article. I don't know. I think he was the obvious coach, unless they wanted to really juice things up and go with Fabien Gaultier. If they'd done that, I would have been like, you know what? I ain't mad at that. I ain't mad at that. I would have worked with that. But the rest of it, I'm sorry. I think the right coach got in. Shame he's probably got a problem with picking picking his own son now. That's always
Yeah.
a bit difficult. Yeah,
It
but
is.
in all fairness, I don't think Owen Faz has had a great time of it in Paris, and that's mostly due to how bad his team has been as well. So we'll see if those reserved seats are maybe like a little switcheroo at the end for his lighty, or maybe even to see how it goes with Kalen Doris.
Yeah, it must be weird because I think Joanne from the Madva I read talking about how surprised he was that he even got a call. He did pick up an injury, and I suppose that's why he's surprised, not necessarily because of skill or ability. And I wonder what sort of call father gives son, after the announcement of the team, or during or before the announcement of the team, to say, sorry, boy, you're not going to make it this time. The other thing with the Lions is there'll be a lot of pride at
Probably,
stake.
probably a
Um,
chat, probably a chat at the Brian, mate. Just like, listen, just look out for the squad, eh? So I might
well,
have a little something there for you. Well,
well,
that's how
Dad
they do it
doesn't.
in South Africa. That's how they do it in South Africa.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you know, Rob Dupree and his three sons.
Yeah.
It's happened a lot in this country. So
It's
yeah,
happened a lot. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. A lot
Or,
of teams,
or dad
a
just
lot of
doesn't
teams have
answer
been
the
put up
phone, and
right. Yeah.
yeah, if dad doesn't
Sorry,
answer the phone,
I
then you know.
interrupted your train of thought. Sorry, I interrupted your train of thought.
Nah, it's all good. It's a rumble of thoughts. But the one thing that I was thinking about is the level of stress, pressure, and absolute pride at stake for the Lions this time round. You know, they came down here and it was COVID times. It was a terrible tour, I think, for anyone to have to travel to South Africa and play behind, in empty stadiums, no fans, no atmosphere really, and then be sucker punched by the South Africans as well, and they thought they really were going to get into it. Um, the Rugby Football Union, the Irish Football Union, the Welsh, they will want to claim victory. The Aussies have been poor in the last couple of seasons. We know they had a really bad World Cup, and no one is really giving them a chance to win this. But were they somehow, through some miracle, win this series or this tour? I think it would really set the cat among the pigeons when it comes to Lions. And I know people will start talking about the future of Lions tours and the rest of it. This is something that started back in 1888, but it's going to matter for them to not just win, but to win well.
You know, in all fairness, the Aussies, have been poor as the Aussie team. And ironically, I actually thought they were picking up nicely under, Joe Schmidt until he then decided, he was, that the Lions tour would be, would be the end of him because he's got to go back home to New Zealand. But if you look at the Lions, if you look at the team they've picked, really, they are the overwhelming favorites for this. And frankly, if they can't win this, it might actually at some weird level threaten the whole sort of Lions mystique, if you want to call it that, because
Yeah,
they are overwhelming favorites to win. I know that the Aussie sides have actually done a bit better. Have actually done a bit better in Super
Super
Rugby
Rugby
Pacific.
Pacific.
Yeah,
Mm.
they've done much better, and they're holding their own. They're fighting their corner, however you want to call it. But if we're being brutally honest, I mean, this, you know, Northern Hemisphere rugby has been coming on for a while.
Yeah,
You'd like to think that at some stage it has to happen for them. And this is as good a chance as any, sort of in the absence of, say, a World Cup happening tomorrow. This is as good a chance as any for them to sort of show that. But it's always problematic. It's the end of their season up north. It's been a long season. Those Leinster boys asking them to get up from not winning the Champions Cup again. And then, like there's a lot of psychological sort of pep talk that needs to happen. There's a lot of trying to keep bodies revitalized and fresh enough for that campaign. And then it's usually about 10 matches, these
yeah,
tours. And so, there's a lot that still needs to happen. But in terms of the players they've picked better, and because they have better. And then if they somehow lose, that'll be a massive upset. But then
yeah.
again,
It
the
is.
Aussies are playing masters of playing at home. The Aussies can be quite gutsy, and they're coached by really one of the coaches I have an awful lot of time for. That's one of the smartest operators doing the rounds, Joe Schmidt. So they might actually have a chance. But I actually think the Aussies might have had a better chance if they gotten their overseas based players to come and play. But that's kind of that's probably like a story for another day, because most other countries kind of don't allow what Russia has allowed in South Africa.
Yeah, yeah. But you kind of feel they're in a situation, or have been in a situation, at least in the recent past, where you probably need the best players representing the Wallabies. Thanks very much to Interceptor for the comment earlier, saying Itoje is a well-deserved captain, and he goes on to say that he's glad that Oz has picked up the game. But as Sim's just alluded to, despite what everybody thinks, and he reckons they'll step it up, I do think that Joe Schmidt, it's a last hurrah. He's leaving. I don't think he would have wanted to not fix the problem, because I agree, he is a smart operator. He's not going to go in without a plan. And you'll want to finish on a high. I think he'll be disappointed that he's leaving. Oh, look at that. Without a paddle. He'll want to make sure that he leaves on a high. The Aussies will want to give him a good send-off. The talk is that Les Kiss is the man named for to replace him as coach. And I mean, we remember Les from when he was
That's
back
all running,
here.
right?
It's unbelievable. And I remember when he was in when he was in Ireland with Gert Small as well. So he's also been around the block. But yeah, I think for Joe, the Aussies will want to finish strongly. And maybe I shouldn't write them off immediately. Maybe do something in at least one of the three tests. If not two, they're going to obviously try and do what they can.
Yeah, look, they have no choice but to try everything they possibly can. Um, like we've already alluded to, he's a very canny operator. Remember, he's the guy that broke. Maybe for people who don't quite know, he's the guy that broke the New Zealand jinx over Ireland all those years ago. I think when they beat them in Chicago or whatever it was, they went and played in Chicago the one year, and basically
Soldier
it was
Field, I think it was.
I think it was literally at a stadium where there'd been like a baseball curse or something along those lines. And so they broke their curse too, having not won. I can't remember how long the streak was. So this is a guy of that kind of level in terms of his coaching ability. They are going to push quite hard to obviously make sure that things happen. But it goes back to who's going to do this for them. From what I've seen of the Aussie teams, there's an awful lot of great or young talent with potential. Let me not say great. The question is, those guys aren't going to win against the Lions for you, but you need to have them around, but you need to dot around sort of some experienced campaigners around them. I see there's there's still a lot of talk about Curtly Beale. Remember him? There's, when you look at a guy like Will Skelton, you think, oh, maybe if they brought Big Will in, that might help calm a few nerves, physically at least. And so there's a whole host of guys that they're kind of letting play overseas and are not bringing them back to kind of, try and sort of, because the Lions tour, if we learned anything from from the previous one against the Boks, between the Boks and the Lions, was all that matters is you have to win it. How it looks is neither here nor there. Yes, everyone would like to do it by playing, by playing expansive rugby and all of this stuff. But actually, all you really need is a Mornay Steyn kick at the death. That's all you need. You don't have to, you don't have to complicate this thing. And so I quite, in that sense, I kind of sit and I think, well, those older guys might be the guys that kind of like bring that kind of nous to be able to almost win a game that maybe you don't quite have any right winning. Then they can all complain like Arsenal's Arteta and say we were the better team and yet we lost. Yeah, 3-1 later. Jeez, try the other one, mate.
No, you can't. Paris is not a happy hunting ground for those fellas. We watched it last night as well. And I don't mean to laugh at Arsenal fans. Sorry, it doesn't happen very often.
I mean to laugh at Arsenal fans. That level of delusion. Remember I was talking about omens earlier. One of the guys on Arsenal TV, I just forget what this guy's name is, but he's always there. Yes, it's Robbie. Yeah, that's exactly it. So Robbie was doing this whole thing about how every year the Pope has died, an English side has won the Champions League. Listen, now that was the gentle sound of the barrel, the bottom of the barrel being scraped. Isn't it like, dude, did you just like say because the poor Pope is gone, this is it? This is it. That is insane.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I've got to say it. I've got to say it.
I'll Mike.
Yeah, I've got to say it now. Up in smoke, I suppose, is it's Arsenal season. You talk about that you need a Mornay Steyn you talk about you need a Mornay Stain moment, and we saw that at Loftus, and it was the inverse of that, and why I think I love what it is you're saying about the Aussies just needing an opportunity is because the inverse of a Mornay Stain moment is you don't need a Ronan O'Gara moment at the very same time. So, so discipline is going to be crucial, and it is going to be fine margins, and it is going to be the number of penalties you give away. It is going to be about how you play the ref as much as you play the opposition, which to me makes it feel like anything could happen.
Look, you want to talk about playing the ref? Um, that leaked footage that we all made so much of in 2021. That was textbook of how to play the ref, because as much as poor Rassi,
I don't think so. I don't know.
listen, you can throw some holy water, but I'm not sure it's gonna work. So, my thing was, as much as Rassi got vilified for, for the whole Nick Berry experience, what he did, what he said, what he didn't do. Um, the referees after that were so mindful of so many of the things that Rassi raised in that 26-minute video. So,
Yes,
suddenly Sia was being treated, with deferential treatment, which
definitely.
came in handy when you consider that he was up against Alan Wynne Jones, who's considered the referee whisperer. I reckon, I mean, this is an aside, but I reckon Alan Wynne Jones, it was less about him being a referee whisperer than he was just older than the Oaks. He was just older than the referees, and they were just thinking, yeah, no, like whatever is in Australian, So we underestimate those things, and we don't think too much of them. Rassi took his punishment on the chest, but actually, what really happened there was he'd laid the foundation for the refs in the subsequent matches to think twice before they made a call. And I'm not going to say the calls particularly favored us, but the calls were a lot kinder, if you want to put it that way. Look, an experience is going to help. I mean, I keep harping on about the experience. I saw in a headline earlier that Schmidt is talking to someone like James O'Connor, who ironically is playing for the Crusaders in New Zealand these days. I mean,
Right.
the scary thing is James O'Connor is still playing.
Yes.
He made his debut for the Wallabies, I think, in 2008,
Yeah.
and it's
But he was
17 years
20
later.
though, wasn't
He was a baby at the time.
he? Yeah.
In a way, when you look at James O'Connor should have been Australia's France Stain, if you
Sure.
think about it, in terms of how early he made it onto the team and the different positions he could play. He could play 10, he could play 12. I'm pretty sure he played a bit of 13, a bit of wing and a bit of fullback. So, it kind of like he should have been they France Stain, but they had a bit of a problem at that time in that they just got all these superstars, because there was Quade Cooper, there's Will Gainier,
Yeah.
Curtis Eel, and you had
Ito.
all these sort of superstars. Yeah, you had all these young superstars, and I think maybe, just maybe, they didn't quite get the direction that they should and they could have. And maybe they got a bit entitled a bit too soon. I think
Yeah.
James O'Connor actually admits that he got a bit entitled throughout his career. But he's since got his act together. I don't even know how old he is. He's probably, still early 30s, probably like 33, 34 or something. But
Yeah.
if he's playing well for the Crusaders, which he is, why not get him? I know he's still playing outside, but it's New Zealand. It's just across the ditch, as they like to say out there. So, maybe a guy like that, just to get that calm. You do need those heads. It doesn't matter how you want to look at it. You don't win if you don't have that level of experience. Sometimes experience is sort of like a cautionary tale, just
Yeah.
knowing what not to do as opposed
Yeah.
to what to do next. And I think a guy like James O'Connor, given his rugby history, might know a lot of what not to do, if you know what I mean.
Oh, he's 34. I just took a look now. And I mean, there were a
Oh,
couple of, especially fly halves. I think even Mornay was still going at 34 and doing pretty
yeah.
good things as well. To the point where when he retired, there were still a lot of people saying, "Oh, do you want to let go of this guy? Like, we need him on the bench, which makes absolute sense. So yeah, well done to him playing across the ditch. And I think also making the decision to go to New Zealand is
Yeah.
very brave, one. And then to go for the Crusaders, I think he wanted to prove a point, and he certainly has. So yeah, let's see what happens. They start off with a warm-up match against Argentina, which I think is very good because the Argentines aren't going to go easy on you. That match is in Dublin. But the Argentines have got a lot of pride. They're going to come out hammer and tongs. Then they go across into Australia, Western Force, Queensland Reds, Waratahs, Brumbies. These are not going to be easy matches. And then there's that invitational Australia-New Zealand game, which should be an interesting mixture. The problem is it'll probably have a little bit of a barbarians feel about it. But I love the fact that they are really trying to test themselves. They're not going easily into this tour, so they're going to be battle hardened by the time that first test match comes around.
That's always the whole point. And I guess if you look back at if you look at back at their last tour, like against the Springboks in South Africa, that's probably the one thing that was missing.
Yeah.
Hard matches where they struggled. Remember, they were running up cricket scores everywhere they went because, half the time, the opposition, had like about 5 guys out with COVID. At times they had, they had COVID issues, and a lot of the Bok guys, I think, had been withdrawn from, a lot of the Bok guys had been withdrawn from the teams to play against them. Probably a Rassie Erasmus masterclass. And look, I mean, I know the Boks were pretty underdone themselves, having not played in 2020 at all due to the COVID outbreak. But I think if there's one of the things that did kind of like cost them the last time around was that they didn't play, they didn't have the opportunity to get battle hardened. And it was quite ironic that, when one of the Boxes sort of warm-up tests fell through against Georgia due to the whole COVID thing, I think that's when half the squad was positive with COVID.
With COVID.
One of the things that then happened was the SAA team suddenly became the Bok team, which was, I mean, that was literally the only game where, they could say, okay, we've played against the real team. But by then, the irony was that the Boks had kind of like gotten a sense of what to expect from them, having played against them, so they could make, better plans for the test matches proper. So I think this time around, that's unlikely to happen, especially with that first game that they're going to play against Argentina. Argentina is very much a team on the up. I know we always say this about them, but I think when you look at what they did under Pontemponi last year in the Rugby Championship, that's a team that's going to cause a lot of people problems. Whenever the Boks lose to someone, we kind of look at the Boks and go, how useless they were. Actually, it was a bit, the Boks obviously could have won it with that last minute penalty, which means it was a game. They were outplayed, but we're still within, one kick of winning. But if you look at that, the Boks actually had been outplayed. Argentina came with a plan and they executed. And the thing about Argentina is they've upped their physicality. They scrummaging. Scrummaging is ironically no longer their main thing. But then the one thing where they've done really well is their attack. Their attack is insane. It makes it very difficult for your defense. So I reckon that's going to be a really nice test, for the Lions.
I agree. I do think they're one of those teams that scores phenomenal tries. So quick turnaround, turnover ball. The wings are always dangerous. Their entire back three is always dangerous. We will talk about them in greater depth as we get closer to the tour. But bringing things back home now, and I think the Aussies do have a chance to maybe do something during that tour. But here at home, all eyes on the URC, and we're in the penultimate round this coming weekend, and it's a Welsh invasion of South Africa that will be happening in this second to last round before the knockouts. The big thing is that everybody will want to find themselves in a top 8 place. The Bulls are already pretty much qualified. Home quarterfinal is what everyone will be gunning for. The Sharks could technically catch the Bulls. Probably won't happen. Bulls have both of their matches, two remaining matches in Pretoria. Sharks, both of their remaining matches, also likewise in Durban. Stormers are back home as well from their tour. The Lions have an outside chance of making the playoffs. They're up against the Scarlets, but it's been, as unfortunately as usual, a bit of a topsy-turvy season for them. And they will be wrapping things up, I think, from a South African point of view, from Emirates Airline Park. Hollywood Bets Sharks up against the Ospreys, Bulls up against Cardiff. Do you see any chance that there could be an upset? When it comes to the Welsh teams, it's very hard to see how they would, especially the crucial stages of the competition, upset the apple cart.
Well, I mean, when you said it's an invasion, obviously our teams are playing the Welsh sides, for the last two rounds, and then we're gonna see where that takes us. But an interesting stat from Welsh sides visiting South Africa in this competition. Of the 24 matches they've played, I think they've only won 3, something ridiculous like that. That is a very damaging stat. But I must admit, though, it was at a time when the Welsh sides were not in the top 8 during the league, or for the majority of the league games. In this instance, we actually have Cardiff in 5th, and we've got the Scarlets in 7th. So you were talking about the possibility of an upset. I reckon if the Bulls are somehow, if they maybe pick their own version of Leinster's third team, and then they fall asleep at Loftus on Saturday, then they will be upset. But I think if the Bulls turn up, especially after the tour they've had, because the tour they've had they won 3 of the 4 games, which I thought was incredible. And so essentially what I'm trying to say is, if there's a chance of an upset, that's Cardiff first. And then the second, it's not quite an upset. The Lions are playing the Scarlets on Sunday, and the Lions playing on being outside of the quarterfinal places already makes them sort of like probably one of those few games that you would expect, the Welsh sides to win. But the rest, the Dragons against the Stormers, I don't quite see it. The Ospreys against the Sharks, where the Sharks have been very difficult to beat at home. Again, I don't see it, especially, I've seen the Sharks' team. It's their strongest team. So I don't quite see it happening.
Yeah, and they've got a couple of players back from injury as well, which is probably good timing from a Springbok point of view. Lukhanyo I think is not going to be starting this weekend. I did take a quick squiz at what they've been saying about.
There's an issue with his knee, Lukhanyo, but John Plumtree sort of pronounced himself sort of not worried, but famous last words. Famous last words, but by the same token, if he says he's not worried, he should have good reason to do that. But obviously, someone like Eben Etzebeth comes back, and there's still a bit of a worry that Ox is not able to play. I think he's still ill. I'm not quite sure.
Illness rather than injury.
Yeah, he needs to lay off the cake,
It will make you sick. And then, it's all also with a view to what Rassie will be considering ahead of the international season. There are a couple of players who I think have a last opportunity to catch the coach's eye. Rassie obviously would have planned well in advance and had the alignment camps, both of them with the overseas-based players, with the local-based players. So he certainly would have, at this stage, probably already have an idea of who his starting 15s are going to be as the international season rolls in. And Italy, being the first match as well, also presents an opportunity for those on the periphery to have one last hurrah. I don't know if there's anyone who maybe has fallen outside of the Springboks' eyes that could maybe force a rethink by the Springbok coaching staff. I don't know. It was a very wide net that he cast.
Yeah, that's the thing. I remember remarking, obviously with respect, that an alignment camp of 56 plus, I can't remember what the other one was, 28 or whatever it was. Well into the 80s in terms of, in terms of the guys who, who got Rusty's attention. It is kind of like every man and his dog. And so I don't quite see anybody from outside forcing their way in. But what that does create, though, over the next potential 5 games in the URC, five, because obviously the last 2 rounds plus the 3 knockout games, is that you've probably got a lot of guys who are not necessarily World Cup winners, who still think they're in with a chance, and therefore are going to be playing to try and make that probably first up in the next two, in the next 2 matches, because that might be the only chance to do it, because they might not make the the knockout stages or quarterfinals. And so I think as a result, you might find the levels of guys trying to sort of get themselves to Rassie and them's eye line, as it were. You might
Mm.
find the levels pick up a little bit as a result. And also with a Baba's game first up, guys
Yeah,
might want just that chance to, to show what they can do in green and gold, even if it's not a test match. Just
yeah,
just that little sort of, this is what I can do in this company. And so and also, if obviously whatever teams make it all the way to the final, you probably can't really select those guys for the Barbars. And probably some of them you can't even select for, for the first game against Italy, because there'll be guys coming back from France, or guys coming back from guys coming back from the UK, etc. And so I think as a result, actually, you might find, you might find there's a lot of dog fights over the next 2 weekends. Just guys
yeah,
trying to sort of, leave a lasting impression, as it were.
yeah. To prove a point, in Barbarians matches famously are a chance to not just shine; they're a chance to show off. Let's face it. It is
And
where other skills come into play.
look, barbarian games they can be a shocker. Obviously it's a chance to shine, and I mean, but the problem is, you almost need the other guys to take it seriously.
Yeah,
And if you look at the barbarians themselves, they basically prepare for that, for that fixture with, with a beer pint in hand, which is a bit of a problem. And then
yeah,
if you look at, say, the Springbok 15, or whatever you're going to call them, or the SAA side, or whatever is going to be put together, the potential issue there is always exactly what I was talking about. Guys that were in alignment camp, which basically said, okay, they're looking at me, kind of like trying to play for themselves instead of for the team. I remember the last
yeah,
SAA side that went on tour, I think in 2022. I'd never seen so many guys play for themselves against those, the Bristol. I can't remember. Was it Munster, the other one, in losing to all those club sides? Guys are
yes,
just playing for
yeah,
themselves. So that's the other danger in playing against a barbarian side, because you sit there and you think, you know what? I need to show what I can do here. And then you start
yeah,
playing for yourself. And of course, lest I remind guys, Sergio Peterson, that
mm,
wonderfully gifted young winger, that, the guy that came on, burst onto the scene like Micah Richards, at 18, scored tries on debut, like this wonderful player. He got his
yeah.
one chance in a green jumper against the Barbarians, I think under Alistair Couture. And if you remember that, he got ragdolled by Naiyaravaro, Tankeli Naiyaravaro, who was like,
Yes,
I think
yeah.
I think we weighed about 130 odd,
He
and
was massive.
poor Sergio was coming in at about 75, 80. Like a
Yeah,
50K
I was
differential.
about to say you're being hard. I think he was a full 80.
Yeah, he got ragdolled, and people forget that actually Sergio scored a really nice try as well. So,
Yeah.
make of barbarian games what you will. They can be wonderful, and they could be a bit of a terrible experience if you don't get what you want.
Yeah, and now people are complaining about ticket prices. And the last time I heard someone complain about ticket prices in the media, Nick Mellich will tell you it can cost you your job. But yeah, it's a
You know
pity,
how much it
this,
cost there? Do you know how much it
yeah.
cost there? No, it was the ticket was $300.
No, it was
It was
wasn't it 400?
No, it's $300 when
It was
they
300.
fired him. Yeah, and now like I think they're all averaging in about 1,300 or something silly.
Oh my
But
gosh.
listen. This is one of those simple things in life. You want the Boks to be world champions?
Yeah.
Yes, everyone does. Do you want the Boks to be back-to-back world champions? Guess what? You're paying to see them because
Yeah.
the thing is, they know for a fact it doesn't matter how much they charge.
People will
Someone will
come.
buy them tickets. Remember how expensive the tickets in Cape Town were supposed to be? There were people selling tickets for 5 grand in Cape Town. How full was Cape Town Stadium? It was loaded. So this is it's almost like we are the victims of the Springboks' success. It's one of those. And if we don't buy them, somebody from overseas will probably buy them, and
Sure.
suddenly you've got as many Italians in the stands as,
Right.
as you've got some Africans because, they can afford it because of the euro. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's quite tricky in that sense. Yeah.
But before we round off, back to URC, is there a chance that anyone could fall out of the reckoning? Quarterfinal places, home quarterfinal places, I think, is the crucial thing for everybody. Well, South African point of view. Is there anyone who could? I don't think. I mean, it's the Stormers really who probably have the most to do it because I'm discounting the Lions.
The Stormers are probably the most under threat. So the Bulls, I'm looking at the table now. The Bulls are in 58, and the Sharks are in 53, which is obviously a bonus points win. But the Bulls is the Bulls is goal difference or points difference is just way too much. It's 117-6. So I don't see the Sharks sort of topple the Bulls unless the Bulls lose both their games. They would have to, and I don't see that happening. And
Yeah.
then the Sharks themselves are 7 points ahead of Cardiff. Again, Cardiff would have to win both their games in South Africa. I don't fancy that for them either.
No.
And so the Stormers basically, I mean, first up, they're up against the Dragons, which is probably the worst of the Welsh teams this season. And therefore that means, they should at least have, 5 points by the time they go into the last round. And then I think all we need to worry about is, well, I don't know if worry is the right word. All we need to think about is a potential home all South African quarterfinal, which
Sure.
as things stand now, which is with the Bulls in third and the Stormers in sixth, would be the North versus South derby at
Mm.
at Loftus. I don't see how, but also looking at the Bulls are a point behind Glasgow
Yeah.
on the standings, and Glasgow still have to go to Leinster, which is going to be a nut because Leinster are hurting anyway,
Mm.
and therefore the Bulls actually could shift into second, which then kind of means the poor Stormers probably get Glasgow in third, and that means they have to go to
Away.
Scotland, which is the
Yeah.
same place they lost last season at the same stage of the competition. They wouldn't
Right.
fancy that. So if you're the Stormers, you kind of like hope things stay roughly the same. And I'm not sure, I must admit, I'm not sure that's actually going to come to pass. And so it's going to be quite interesting.
Yeah, it does. But the saving grace, though, is that I think John Dobson has started to get them ticking over. A couple of injuries are done. We saw Sasha doing some things, and Marnie's even back from injury as well. So they look like they're building up a bit in terms of depth. They did suffer some hard injuries. Losing Steven Kitshoff wouldn't have helped them. So
Yeah.
for the Stormers' sake, I hope that change in fortunes with injuries will help the last little bit of URC.
Looking at how they've played over the last little while, and I'm going to take out the Connacht and the Benetton games because Benetton was a weird blowout for me. I didn't understand how that happened because Benetton's a very good team. Connacht was quite interesting in that the Stormers got ahead too quickly, and then they started thinking it was going to be too easy, and then and then it got really difficult as the Irish side came back at them. But like the game I probably really want to look at is that game against Ulster. That was a game they should have won. It was away, and the way they played initially, to
Yes.
me, kind of suggested that the Stormers are starting to kind of play like themselves. Obviously, the big talking point this week has been about selection. You mentioned all those players. You mentioned the fact that Mani's back. Mani's back to join Sasha Feinberg and Gomez Zulu, to join Damien Willems,
Damien
to
Willems.
join Warwick Palant. Those four could, theoretically be in the same backline. I don't think so. I think three of them will make it onto the backline, and then one will come off the bench. That's if Mani's ready to play. And
Sure.
so the way I'm looking at it is, the more they have players like that, a lot of people say, oh, well, these are all like sort of instinctive, off the cuff type players. But the problem with guys like that is, when you have guys like that, they allow the Stormers to play like the Stormers.
Yeah.
So what the Stormers do is they play on transition. They don't, they're not a team that kind of like, if you give them sort of set plays and, they're not going to hit you with the strike move or first phase. They're not that kind of
Yes.
team. What they really
Set
want
piece to set
is
piece.
for you to kick on Boogie, or to kick on Sasha, so that they can run it back at you. And
Yeah.
when they do that, with that brilliance of those players, they can cut you to bits and pieces, especially obviously if you don't kick well. Usually the way you kick, if you're going to kick against the Stormers, is to kick shallow and to kick contestables, and
Yeah.
be good at contesting. That way
Win
you
it
then
back.
stop the fact that they're going to wind back at you. So I think having those players, so I'll make an example and say, when they had a guy like Yuri Mathieu playing at 10 for them, Yuri is a wonderful young flyer, but he's very much conventional and structured. And so you kind of like had a team whose playing pattern was almost at odds with, with the way they fly off plays.
Yeah.
I still remember that infamous reverse pass he tried to throw, and it went to ground against the Lions, when, actually a normal pass would have sufficed. It's almost like it weighed so much on him that he was replacing a guy like Miney, who might do something,
Like, yeah.
instinctive and sublime like that. And he tried to do the same thing. If anything, actually, he played very well in the rain against the Stormers. Against the Bulls. So that's when you kind of get a sense of, that's why I'm saying, the return of those players is probably going to allow the Stormers to play a bit more like themselves. And when they play like themselves, it's not a comfortable place to be if you're the opposition.
Dude, I'm gonna have to leave it there. I'm 2 hours ahead. It's 10 o'clock, and the weird thing about being on an island is that every shop is closed by 5 o'clock, man, and every restaurant is closed by 10. So it's, it is small town living. So yeah, I'm gonna have to call it.
All you need is the pub, right?
Yeah, they don't have a lot of options, my guy. As much as I love it here, I'm gonna have to come back home. They are benefits. They are
This is what
benefits.
happens. This is what happens when we send people to the Seychelles. Oaks start complaining. They're like first world problems, mate.
Yeah,
When you're in the Seychelles, you got to do what they got to do. You
all
know,
right, all right.
that's just how it works. Don't give us your first world problems here.
Yeah.
We literally in the thick of it here. Please.
No, I'm gonna call it then. But a quick reminder: if you are the violence we're hearing, I think that's pork. I think that's the Welshman. I think it's just sour. It's just bitter that there are only two of them in the Lions squad. But yeah, no, it has been a good visit. I'll be back in Joburg next week. I can't wait to see what will happen in the URC specifically, which is yeah, it's really hotting up at the moment. I think, yeah, sizoyishiya apho jo, gqibile mna ndiphelile ndidiniwe. So thanks very much.
Put us at the next week.
So tata next week. It's always good, Sim. Thanks very much, man. And
No
thank
worries.
you at home for joining us. Thanks for the comments. We love them. And as you can see over there, no, over here, there, give us a like, a subscribe, and make sure you share this. We want to grow the community. We're looking to get a couple of more subscribers on, and it's been wonderful to have the conversations. Let's keep them going. Cheers, everyone.